Hello, welcome to Disenthrall. I am Patrick, and today we have an awesome guest. His name is Mark Beaumont, a professional educator, writer, artist, and musician. He lives in Thailand with his wife Pim and daughter Jade, and is about to publish his first book, Unschool Yourself First, A Parent's Gateway to Self-Directed Learning. He considers himself to be part of what is frequently called the Liberty Movement and advocates peace and freedom in life and learning. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, thank you. Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
It is great to have you on. I'm excited about your book. I got an early copy. I don't think it's actually available yet, right? What's the availability date?
It'll be in September. I'm not sure. I'm just working through the cover of the book with the artist, and as soon as he's done, we'll be sending it out there. So I'd say in about 2 weeks.
So I got like a super secret sneak peek. I felt very special. I just finished reading it today, in fact, right before the show, so I'm boned up and ready to go.
All right.
Maybe if we could start, just kind of introduce yourself. Tell us your story, where you came from, where you are, and how you got there.
All right. Well, let's see. I guess I'll start really quickly by saying, I'm married and I have a wife, Thai wife, and a child, Jade, who is 12 years old. I actually have two families, which I'll mention briefly, as I was adopted at about a month old to a family that lives in New England still to this day, but met my biological family about 10 years ago, and they are Oklahoma-based. So I have a kind of an interesting perspective on the nurture-nature thing.
Oh, wow.
I've been living in Thailand for most of the last 15 years. I'm a professional educator, although I will admit that I'm just trapped currently in a career that I'm not really enthusiastic about, at least in the schooling system. Kind of doing some freelance work on the e-learning side and discussing possibly opening up an unschooling school, if you will, a self-directed learning center back in the United States, perhaps in Oklahoma. And so that's just kind of a rough of who I am and where I'm at.
Okay, awesome. And I believe you consider yourself an anarcho-capitalist, right?
I do. I consider myself an anarcho-capitalist. I would happily share society with anybody who can function, basically within the principles of the non-aggression principle. I think that's the key underpinning to taking our species to the next level of, whatever kind of evolution, cultural evolution we're going through to reach what I would say a base level of what we could call civilized. I think we're incorrect when we call ourselves civilized right now. And I think anarcho-capitalism is the best political and economic system out there to help us get to a civilized state of existence.
I think you're absolutely right on that. I love hearing origin stories, though. Like, what was your political journey? How did you arrive? Or were you born as an ANCAP, so to speak?
I mean, maybe I was born as an ANCAP. I have no idea. I definitely was born as an anti-authoritarian, which has been a blessing and sometimes a curse in life, especially in a top-heavy authoritarian place like the United States. But I'll give you a great story. I actually put this shirt on today, which is related to the story I'm going to tell.
Okay.
It's a Ron Paul t-shirt, and I caught this in the summer of 2008 in Washington, D.C., in front of the Capitol building. And I think it was Adam Kokesh, or maybe it was Gary Franchi, who threw it from the stage. And they threw a couple of 2 or 3 free T-shirts out, and I caught one of them. But my brother, my biological brother from Oklahoma, he turned me on to Ron Paul in probably about 2006 or 7. And I read, actually, I don't know if I had read his books at that point, but I'd seen him talk, in various instances. And was really just I remember the first time I was really impressed by the guy as I'm sitting there watching, what people would say, oh, an old white male or whatever these kind of New England, pejoratives are to throw out.
Right.
And this guy's a Republican and I'm coming kind of more from at this point in my life, a liberal New England background. And I'm thinking like this so-called, old white male Republican from Texas is up there talking about how prostitution and drugs should be legal. And I was just like, what in the hell is going on here? So, I got into it, and I happened to be doing a master's degree program at George Mason University. And so I was there when this big Liberty March happened, so I went. And before Ron Paul got up and spoke, I was surrounded by all kinds of different people experiencing cognitive dissonance, and some were really far left and some were really far right. And I had these leftist pot smoking bongo playing people on one side, like, saying, oh, no, Ron Paul's message is really this or that or the other thing. And then I had the pro-life Christian group on the other side of me talking about Ron Paul's messages of this or that. But when Ron Paul got up and spoke, he said, look, my message is liberty. And when he said that, like, it had a powerful effect on me. And in that moment, the left-right paradigm vaporized. And all of a sudden, I could see clearly a bit of what was actually happening in front of my eyes, which I was having a hard time understanding. And so that, I would say, is the moment of like when I broke out of the matrix or began to really break out of the matrix.
Very well described. Just hearing you talk about that happening in yourself, like, just brought back memories of kind of that exact same process in my head when it was happening to me. It was just like, it was a series of wait a second moments where I just heard something and I stopped and I thought and I realized that's going to change literally everything I think about the entire world. I'm going to have to process that for a while.
Yeah,
yeah,
it is. It's a process. It is definitely a process.
So you found yourself, I'm sorry, what country was it you're in right now?
I'm in Thailand right now. I'm in a place called Phuket, which is a tropical resort island in the southern part of the country.
Oh, what brought you there?
Well, that's a good question too. Is years ago, it was about 15, 16, 17 years ago, I was, I had burned through a couple of, fairly useless college degrees, one from Goddard College, which is like cultural Marxist indoctrination, toxic place. Lots of nice people, but just the thinking going on there is so nasty. It's Bernie Sanders went to school there.
Right.
And I was coming out of that world and I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, and philosophy and pottery were not exactly bringing home the bacon. So I thought, I can go and teach. I've got these useless degrees. What can I do? And so I went and I started teaching art. And I was teaching ceramics and guitar at a small school, a private school in Maine called Wayne Feet School, which is a very good school, actually. People like it and blah, blah, blah. And I was really interested in Buddhism. I became interested in Buddhism when I was living in Vermont and had a physics teacher invite me to a lecture. And I thought it was going to be about science. And I went and he gave a lecture about Buddhism. And I was listening to these ideas and I was like, wow, that really makes a whole heck of a lot of sense to me, these kind of abstract metaphysical ideas of Buddhism. So I got very interested in Buddhism. And then while I was being an educator in Maine, I was like, well, why don't I go overseas and teach English? Because then I can live in a Buddhist country and kind of check that out from the inside, and I can still make some money. So that's what got me over here. And since I've moved way beyond being an English teacher and actually gone and gotten certified to be a proper educator from Texas, actually, and got a master's degree from George Mason University in international education.
Wow.
And through that experience have, gotten to the point now where I really, don't believe in the system or the paradigm of education that I went in to become, highly qualified and a professional at.
It's almost like you're more qualified to talk about the shortcomings of the system because you're qualified to work inside it than somebody like me who's not. I know it's kind of off topic, but I'm curious.
Yeah.
What about Buddhism rang true with you to the point where you moved to Thailand? I mean, for me, maybe I'm just like a homeboy that doesn't like leaving, but it's like an extreme thing to move to another country. It must have. What is there like what's the draw?
The draw. Well, I mean, there's a lot of draws. I mean, Buddhism was a draw. Being able to save money was a draw. And, as a school teacher teaching arts at a private school in Maine, I wasn't making a ton of money. I quite find Asian women attractive. I'll just put that out there because that was a factor. Maine doesn't exactly have a lot of Asian women or any women for that matter. And so
wait, I thought
that
you were
was
supposed to be a racist white guy. That's the big thing right now, right?
People love to throw that stuff around. I find racism to be one of the most repugnant things on the planet. But whatever. People can think what they want, and I can't really do much to help them, I don't think.
Right. Well, okay. So, what inspired you to write a book? That's a feat that I have yet to figure out how to do.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of a long process, and it started as I was doing my master's degree. I was getting into some really interesting research, and so I started trying to do things in my classroom. And this is when I was in Taiwan, and I started like doing what is called an open-ended assessment. And I was teaching in a school that used the primary years program of the International Baccalaureate, and they have these elementary school units that they plan. They're about 6 weeks long. And at the end of the unit, the students of the 6 weeks are supposed to share what they learned about whatever, simple machines or, some kind of history or cultural scientific thing. And, they can do this by doing any kind of sharing of what they learned, not just the old, multiple choice or true, false, short answer questions, but they can do a presentation or do an art show or what have you. And so when I gave these open-ended assessments, and said, okay, you can work with whoever you want, you can show me what you learned however you want, the room would explode with activity, and art supplies would get ripped off the shelves, and the computers would flick on, and the kids would be buzzing around the classroom. And at the end of the day, it was almost impossible to get the kids to leave. And I started looking and going, well, what's going on here when I say you can show your learning any way you want, and the classroom erupts with activity? And at about the same time, this guy called Ken Robinson had done a TED Talk, which I think is now the most watched TED Talk of all time. And Ken Robinson has some fabulous ideas. And since then, I'd say I have mixed feelings on Ken Robinson. I think he's amazing, but he's a bit to the status side for me to totally take as completely my style. But his ideas of passion and talent being really the keys to good education, that made sense to me. And then I started reading a book by Dan Pink, who has a TED Talk about the surprising science of motivation. And when I was reading his book, I just said, hey, I wonder if he's got any talks out there. And I went and I found his talk, and it was semi-related to the book I was reading. But he talked about the science of motivation and autonomy, freedom being really the most motivating force there was to humans, and brought out all this great research done by lots of different entities. Ironic that maybe the Federal Reserve and the London School of Economics were some of these people funding the research. But what it showed is that autonomy, mastery, and purpose were really the fundamental drivers of motivation. And I in that moment, it was almost like I broke out of another paradigm. And I was like, wait a minute, I understand what I'm seeing in the classroom when I give kids more and more freedom, and the excitement level and the motivation exploding. And so, I guess to kind of wrap that thought up is that it was through proper educational research that I started to break out of what might be called 20th century factory education and starting to open up to what is now being commonly called unschooling or self-directed learning.
I can. Okay. So for me, I had another one of those wait a second moments with education a few years back when I first heard about unschooling. It's very commonly discussed, I guess, in ANCAP circles. So very early on, I heard about it, and I was like, okay, that's hippie stuff, because there's a hippie undercurrent in a lot of ANCAP circles. Some people that are very free with drug use and stuff like that. Whether or not you agree that it should or should not be legal or punished by cops and guns is a separate issue from actually wanting or not wanting to use them. But anyway, so I initially rejected the idea, but it planted a seed in my brain, and months later, I'm sitting there thinking about my childhood and my path. I was in an alternative school for a while, what we call an alternative school here in Texas. And all that means is they kind of have a different set of rules for a different set of students that were sent there for various reasons, some good, some because they got in trouble. And my particular school was sort of self-paced learning. So you still had a curriculum, everything else was pretty much exactly the same as a normal school. You still had to do all the same steps and tests and qualifications and everything, but they let you just show up when you wanted, leave when you wanted. As long as you got what they wanted you to do done, they didn't care. It was self-paced, so I could blast through a semester's worth of work in a week, which I turned out to be more than capable of. I don't consider that a brag because it's public school. It's not that difficult. But just having that little bit of freedom, not even control over what I was learning, just having the freedom to choose when I learned was very pivotal. It was like an empowering thing for me, empowering enough to where I couldn't stand school. I was bored out of my mind. So when I went to the school, I would show up and I would say, okay, this is focus time. I'm going to knock out as much as I possibly can so that I don't have to come back here anytime soon. And I would. And I kind of accelerated through that process. But later in my life, this was the second part of the aha moment, was I realized that the reason why I was accelerating my schooling, like I was doing as much as I could to get out of there as fast as I could, is because when I went home, that's when it was me time for me to learn about the stuff that I wanted to learn. And through, I guess starting in junior high on, ever since I got my first TI-85, graphing calculator, I was learning how to code. I was learning the programming languages. I was learning the workings of, computers and devices and embedded development and all this stuff. And so throughout my schooling, I would go to school, sleep. I was one of the obnoxious students that packed a pillow in my backpack at times, and I would just whip it out and put it on my desk and go to sleep, wake up, pass the test, and go home, so that I could continue teaching myself the stuff I wanted to learn. I unschooled myself despite the system that I was in. And so that was my aha moment, when I realized that surreptitiously, I unschooled myself, so why wouldn't I want to embrace this idea for my kids? It's how I learned. The stuff they made me learn is, mostly useless. But the stuff that I taught myself pay my bills every day. And of course, I owe it to my mother for supporting me by, buying me the computer and keeping me into all the, expensive equipment that entails over time. But yeah, so that was I just wanted to kind of relate my story because it kind of applies here.
Oh, that's an excellent story. And you were lucky that alternative school is a hybrid. And as far as the how you learn, it's kind of more towards the unschooling, and the what is kind of a mix. And you have to do the little hoop jumping that they put out for you. But you had enough time in your life to actually go home and pursue your actual interests. And I'd imagine today, if you sat down and thought about it, what do I remember from the hoop jumping experience of education, and what do I remember from my own out-of-school self-directed learning? And I'm sure what you did on your own free time is what you remember, and what has, you have a deep understanding, so to speak, of. And I use that often when I talk to parents, because parents get so freaked out and so scared. I often get them to reflect back to their own kindergarten through grade 12 experience and ask them simply, hey, what do you remember that you learned in high school even? Can you remember anything? And people start scratching their heads. I'm like, exactly. So what are we doing here? We're stuffing kids in these rooms for 6, 7, 8 hours a day with a bunch of people they may or probably may not like so much, and being force-fed information that they may or probably are not interested in. And it doesn't really have a high value for learning quality. There isn't much learned, and there's actually quite a lot of negative learning that goes on, as how people are treated and how people feel about themselves. You mentioned learning at your own pace, which really makes a lot of sense. And it's a difficult thing for parents because we've been conditioned with this standards-based approach to education, where, the term, oh, your child isn't at their level, like somehow when you're in 3rd grade, there's a magical level of language or math capability you're supposed to have. And it's ridiculous. These are averages. And when you look at the rates of learning, I won't get into the details, but, some children start learning reading, writing, and even math at a younger age, maybe 4, 5, 6 years old. But a lot of kids struggle until they get to a different point in their maturity, and don't start learning to maybe around 8 or 9 years old. And looking at math specifically, it's very interesting. The research and some of the practice that's going on with math is that what it looks like is when children reach, sometime early teens, say 13, 14 years old, they really reach what we call in education the zone of proximal development. And that's kind of the the space where you are ready to learn something, but you might need a little bit of help. You might need an adult or a teacher around to help you make the leap from, where you are now to understanding some pre-algebra or whatever it is you're being presented. And people like to look at Finland as a country because they started to embrace some of these ideas, and they wouldn't start teaching, advanced mathematics, anything above basic arithmetic until middle school. And, at least a few years ago, they had the highest, test scores in the world, which I don't like to put all our weight on test scores because I don't find them particularly meaningful. But most parents and most people around the world really do think those tests matter a lot. And so when you have a place like Finland doing something really different with mathematics and getting great test results, that's a powerful a powerful scaffold to get parents from one frame of understanding to another frame of understanding and start to really open up to, what you call the self-paced learning or even more an extreme, a proper unschooling context to learn in.
Right. So two things stood out in my mind. One was what the words I used, the phrasing I used when I said the things I taught myself are what's paying my bills today.
Yeah.
I think an important paradigm shift that your book calls out is that everything you learn, you taught yourself. Even the stuff that you learned in private or public in proper school. You don't learn things you don't teach yourself. If you are absolutely uninterested or unmotivated to learn something, it doesn't enter your brain in any meaningful or permanent way. You teach yourself everything. And kids have an innate drive, like a serious motivation to learn everything. They follow me around everywhere I go in the house. They learn everything I do. And that brings me to the second thing that you brought to my mind was that the developmental stages that they say, your kid should be speaking by this age and he should be, out of diapers by this age and reading by this age or whatever. It induces a lot of completely unnecessary stress. My son was, I guess, a few months late, maybe 6 months late speaking, to the point where we went to a speech therapist and we had him evaluated, and they said that he was behind and we needed to enroll him in speech therapy, which really just involved them like forcing him to sit in a chair while they tried to make him speak with various weird incentives. And we pulled him out of that immediately. And it turns out just, if we waited a couple months, he's way ahead in his language skills now, and he speaks better than most kids his age. It was just a brain development thing. His started a few months late, and then he blasted ahead without any help from these insane coercive programs. And if we had just kind of released that stress as parents, it would have been so much nicer. So,
no, absolutely. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to kind of, we've talked a lot about unschooling, but we haven't defined the term. Could you define for us what is unschooling?
Yeah, I was going to read a couple of quotes, but I think I'll skip that. But if people really want to look at a good definition, John Holt has a really good definition out there that you can find on the internet. But very simply, what is unschooling? It's really, the terms people use, natural and organic, those terms really resonate well with me. When you think about us as a species, as mammals, and you look, and it was really Peter Gray, he's a doctor of evolutionary biology at Boston College, and he had a son who struggled in school, sounded like a classic anti-authoritarian, maybe ADHD type learner to me, and he sent his kid to Sudbury Valley School in Massachusetts, which is basically a self-directed learning program. And his son had a great experience there. And so he really got interested in education and this style of education. And so he's become, I'd say one of our greatest voices in the homeschooling and unschooling movement. And he approaches this from an evolutionary and a biological point of view, which is very fascinating when he looks back all the way back to like hunter-gatherer societies and looks at how they learn, because people think school is this old thing that goes back to Greece or wherever they think it goes to, which it doesn't. It's just about 200 years old. So when you start to look at the evolution of humans as learners and the kinds of institutions or ways that we went about learning, And then you also look at it from the point of view of being a mammal and how do mammals learn. Really, you start to look at what is unschooling. It's just like anarchy education. It's a natural free state of existence and being able to learn within that free state without being coerced to learn anything in particular at any particular time or any particular subject. And when you look at say, hunter-gatherers, or you even look at, what you might call more primitive peoples that still are on the earth today, living in remote areas, how do their children learn? And, they learn basically by just playing and observing adults, modeling the behaviors of adults. And when you have people who are, kind of out there like hunting and farming to survive, those are the kinds of skills that you're going to need and the kind of knowledge you need to be able to pick up to survive. And when you look at that natural learning, there's no classes, there's no school, there's no lessons. There's just kids living around adults. And when they get old enough, they start to be able to take on greater levels of personal responsibility, like contributing to maybe hunting some of the food or to growing some of the animals or maybe protecting the tribe from an outside threat or whatever it is that you have to do to perpetuate your little world or your little society. So to kind of wrap that up shortly, what is unschooling? Unschooling is non-coercive learning. It is being your child's assistant or guide, not their dictator or controller, and helping your child to be empowered to follow what it is they're interested in and to provide as much opportunity as you can afford, time and money-wise, to engage your child or let them engage themselves in whatever it is they want to do. And that's kind of the simple version. Please, if anyone's listening, Google around and read proper definitions, and maybe that can help you understand it to a better level.
Yeah, and for the viewers, if you have any questions or comments on the show as we go, please feel free to submit them on the YouTube page, and we can get them in towards the end of the show. We'll have a Q&A session. So it reminded, this is sparking such enthusiasm for me. I'm just really excited about the topic. When I was in this alternative school, all the teachers in all the public schools, in and out of the one I'm talking about, are just mostly completely disengaged. I had this one teacher who cared and saw that I was bored and not really getting anything out of it, and that I was, excelling in the computer class, mainly because I was way beyond it from my home learning. And so I told her, like, what can I do, besides all this boring stuff? Can I, because this was the accelerated learning class. So I was like, what can I do to just kind of write off this class and move on? Because I'm not really learning anything here. You and I both know it. And she's like, okay, let's just have one big final project where you write a program. Nobody else was writing programs in class. I mean, like actual applications that you could sell, right? So she challenged me to write, she was also a science teacher, she challenged me to write this program that taught kids morphemes, which are like the scientific prefixes and suffixes to words. So for the first time in my life, I had a real project that I was motivated to do. I knew nothing of how to do it. I had to teach myself how to write an actual a piece of software that I could sell for people to install on their computers. I had to figure out how to use software to teach kids things, which wasn't really done back when I was in high school. Maybe there were some entry-level programs for learning software, but this was still a totally new industry. So I kind of sort of in my own little bedroom at 16 years old was trying to pioneer e-learning. I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying it was just, I was so engaged that I stayed up until 5 a.m. every night, which of course made me exhausted the next day at school. But I was learning these life skills that made my life what it is today on my own, thanks to a teacher simply like sparking the idea, giving me a chance and the opportunity and a little bit of support to make it happen. And of course I have to keep crediting my parents for also doing the support, because that is unschooling. So we talked about it like what it is conceptually, but practically, maybe you can talk more about this, it's just basically helping your kid when they latch onto something that they're passionate about, like I was about computers and coding, latching onto that with them, and then sort of just pouring time and resources and everything they possibly need to go as far as they possibly can with whatever it is that they're in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. when I think about like what you just said, it's in the book. I talk about unschooling in tandem with schools, and the reason why I put that in the book is because I realize most people probably don't have a situation in their life, unless their child's old enough to be home alone, to be able to do this. People are just trapped by circumstance into sending their kids to usually public school, but sometimes private school. And so you managed to actually, you have a good story about how that can work, because some of the, the people in the unschooling community are really of the mind that if your child goes to school, you're not an unschooler. And I don't subscribe to that opinion. And the reason why is my own daughter has decided at points in her life, she wanted to go to school. She wanted to try this thing out. Mostly she just wanted to hang around with more kids. And so of course I let her. I was enthusiastic about her going for it. And some people were critical of that. And I said, look, if you prevent your child from going to school when that is their will or their wish or their desire, that's actually opposite to unschooling in my mind. That's contradicting the philosophy and methods. And so, I think most people, at least at this point, are going to have a similar story to you. If their parents get into unschooling, is they're going to have to do it when you're actually at home from school. And so you're going to have to let your kids stay up till 5 o'clock in the morning writing programs and going to school blurry-eyed, because that's what your child wants to do. And so, you have like sort of the perfect story to highlight that point in my book, which a lot of people are critical of. My own daughter has done a little bit of school in her life. She's 12, and she's probably done maybe 2 years total of school, a semester here or a semester there. And then but if you want to just talk about like, well, what is unschooling outside of school completely? If you're lucky enough to be able to let your child learn at home and to be able to learn what they want, when they want to and how they want to, really unschooling is just letting your child play, and play is really the learning. And that's all you really need to do, is let your child play. And when they get to be about 7, 8, 9 years old, that play is going to take on more dynamic form than just messing around with whatever it is they're messing around with on the floor. And they're going to start to take more dynamic things, more dynamic shape. And as the child grows up to be a teenager, it's going to get more dynamic until you have, your child starts writing programs or learning a musical instrument or another language, or starting to do maybe some apprenticeship at a job in the neighborhood that they're interested in, or maybe even taking college classes online. You look at these unschoolers, and there's not a lot of data, but there is some data coming out of children who grew up completely unschooled and have entered, adulthood and gone on to some kind of a career. And these children are out competing schoolers on every level, even on test scores, which, is not something that the average unschooler is all about, but some states require that you take certain tests. And so there is data that's being streamed, and you can see homeschoolers and unschoolers outcompete schoolers in every way, including, the kind of more emotional and social things that get discussed in terms of learning now in schools.
So that, I think, just to back up slightly, talking about letting your kid go to school because they want to is, I think, a good segue into, there's practical arguments for unschooling, which I really think are unbeatable. Like, my entire life experience tells me very clearly that this is the way I learned, and people learn, and I see my kids learning this way. So I think I think we've made a good practical case, and maybe we can continue doing that in a little bit. But there's also an ethical case for unschooling, which I think is very important to anarchy, to freedom, how do I say this? So, like, my home is designed and curated to emulate how I want the world to be for my kids. Mm-hmm. I want it to be a place completely peaceful, completely devoid of coercion and force and theft and extortion. I want it to be a place where good relationships are embraced and strengthened, and bad relationships are shunned and pruned off. because as people, we all accept the reality with which we're presented. And so if the first reality we come into is a happy, wholesome place where there is no external parental figure forcing us to do things every moment of our lives, no matter our own desires, then when we become adults, we will have that same expectation on the world. And when the world doesn't return that, we will resist and change the world to be what we expect it to be. So that is why not forcing my child into a public school or into a private school or into any schooling that they don't want to go to is a very important ethical imperative for me. Now, if you had anything to say on that, go for it, and then I'll continue my rant.
I'll just listen. You think of a lot of different things here, but keep going.
Well, I mean, you're the guest, and I'm doing most of the talking, so forgive me if I'm bogarting it. But no, it's
all good.
But the counterbalance to that is we have an absolute and very strong imperative to deliver unto our adult children's lives a healthy, wholesome, educated person. So we have an obligation to them to make sure that they're educated and provided with tools so that they can go out into the world when they're adults and live prosperously. So can we talk about the balance between the ethics of not forcing them down roads they don't want to go down to, but also making sure that we do our jobs and meet our obligations to them to provide educated, prosperous adult children?
Yeah, it's unschooling ties very directly into anarchy or an ANCAP, you might call a worldview or whatever. There's so many ways I could approach this, but let me just start by bringing up what we call, freedom and then personal responsibility, right? Because as parents, we actually have to take some responsibility for our kids, and the younger they are, the greater the responsibility. And so, if your child wants to eat ice cream 3 meals a day, every day, you're not going to let that happen because that's not a healthy thing for your child to do. If your child takes a baseball bat and whacks his friend off the head with it when he gets angry, there's going to be consequences. There's going to be conversations and whatever else a parent might deem an appropriate action for something like that, right? And so we actually have to assume some responsibility for our child. And as they're growing up, eventually they can get to the point where they have enough personal responsibility to have complete freedom over their lives. And if you think about government almost as like a parent, in that sense, is that when they put you into school, they're sort of trying to do the same thing, but they're not actually raising a child in a state of free will. Now, this gets into addressing the ethics question of school. I'll just say flat out that it is unethical to send children to school. I would state very, kind of cautiously, but it is a valid statement, is that school really is a form of child abuse. It's not that everything that happens in school is bad and abusive, but as a system, as a way to they say educate, and I don't think it's really educate. It's more like indoctrinate or condition to an authoritarian paradigm and muddle with a mix of fact and fiction and propagandize really these children against their free will, oftentimes to the point where children get so unhappy that suicides even happen due to bullying or just the extreme pressures of school, is that it's really unethical to send your children to school, which is an awkward statement because most Americans, and I'd say most people around the world, think school is like the blessing to society and what makes nations and people great. And I don't think that's true. I think the opposite is true. I think education really is not being looked at as the evil that it is. And I don't want to say education, that's the wrong word. Schooling is really a horrible system which is doing massive damage to our species and to our societies worldwide. So yes, there's an ethical question. Is it ethical to send a child into what you could say is a training program to accept, a form of chattel slavery. Is that really, when you look and you get to know how the United States is organized with the Federal Reserve System and the IRS and the income tax, is that really, whether people want to admit it or not, and the leftists are going to go ballistic when you say that taxation is theft, it's kind of theft. I mean, yes, it's theft, but it's more like theft like was to the slaves when they had to work and all of their efforts went to the slave owner. It's that same kind of dynamic. So to send a child into a system that it's not my opinion. You can actually go and read the history of school and where school comes from and who were the people bringing this system from Prussia and from Europe into the United States. What their goals was really to indoctrinate people to accept, you could say very loosely, a socialist, communist, political and economic system, and to bring that to a global scale and, what is also commonly called the New World Order. And I'm not trying to be conspiracy theorist. You can go on YouTube and watch world leaders spit that term out left and right. So if people think it's a theory or a conspiracy, they're just not paying attention, because most of our presidents for 50 years have been promoting the New World Order. And you can look at Gordon Brown and leaders around the world, never ending, talking about the New World Order and all of this stuff. And school is a big part of.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I absolutely agree. It kind of goes to the accepting the reality we're presented with. If we're born into a world that has a strong, authoritative, punishing parental figure, when we're adults, we naturally expect there to be an entity still above us. And so I think that creates the government or perpetuates the government. And I think the way we change the world is by changing how we interact with our children. We give them different expectations about how the world around them should work and how the world around them should interact with them. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I think unschooling is key. I don't think you can do this properly and ethically without unschooling, without non-coercive education. So if you had any more thoughts, if not, I can move on.
Just really quick, just to speak of it figuratively, if you think of growing a plant, you can give the plant water which it needs and even fertilizers or manure or something you can put on that plant which will help it to grow healthier and stronger. And if you think about the kind of fertilizer, if you will, that is put on children in schools to help them grow is really not helping them to grow to be a healthy, vibrant plant, but really just sort of wrapping them to a trellis and making them grow a certain way to fit the needs of the elite or the 1% or the banking cabal or the petro-Nazis or whatever you want to call this group of people, at the top of the pyramid. They are doing this. It's not a conspiracy theory. This is the program that was intended and has been rolled out and is now brainwashing most of the children around the world.
So I'd like to, I keep stopping and making sure that you don't have any thoughts so that I don't steamroll you, because I'm so excited. I'm just kind of charging on ahead. So please interrupt me if you have something to say. I'd like to talk about the fears, because that was my initial reaction when I started thinking about unschooling. Oh, so now I'm taking on a huge relationship that I did not previously have. Responsibility, that's what I meant. I'm taking on a huge responsibility that I didn't previously have, which is the entire education of my kid. Actually, I think I did have that before, and I was just abdicating it and passing it off to someone else, right? It is our responsibility from the beginning to provide for the complete education, and most people just kind of pass that off to the government to do for them, thinking that sort of checks that box for them and they don't have to worry about it anymore, right? But it's scary. You don't know what you're doing. Well, I'm not a teacher, so I had no idea what I was doing. So I start thinking, well, do I have to make up a curriculum? And do I have to basically find a way to recreate the school for my kid? No, absolutely not. But I wanted to talk about some of the common fears that people have. Can we go over some of those?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest common fear that I think parents have is, if I don't send my child to school and I do this unschooling thing, will I mess my child up? Will I ruin their chance to a good life or a better life?
Right.
Will they be able to go to college? Will they be able to read and write? Will they be able to be a high functioning adult in society? Will they be able to get the things that they need and hopefully some of the things they want in life? And I can talk about this. I think when I share this, I think it takes on like maybe an extra bit of validity, because when I decided or my wife and I decided that we were going to pull our child from school and to try homeschooling, and I didn't know what unschooling was at this point. I just knew that I was like, I had left the schools. I got the great opportunity to run a big factory in northern Thailand, which would make salmon flies for fly fishing, which paid really well. And it wasn't what I was looking to do, but I had experience running factories. So I took this job. And then instead of my daughter getting a free education as part of my benefit, I had to pay. And so I started paying this little, private kind of hippy dippy alternative school up in northern Thailand in Chiang Mai. And it was a school that was set up like around the ideas of Buddhism and a healthy environment and, international education, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. And after a semester, I was just thinking like, what a god-awful waste of time and money this is like what I see going on in my daughter's classroom is I wouldn't do that if I was a teacher in the classroom. And I certainly don't want to pay for this garbage. I'm like, what else can I do? And, maybe it's kind of a blessing in disguise is that really most of the schools, or all of the schools, even the most elite expensive schools in Chiang Mai, Thailand, where they have, very expensive international schools that cost you, $20,000, $30,000 a year, just like it would in the US to send your child. And I'm like thinking like, I wouldn't pay a penny for any of these schools. Maybe I should look into this homeschooling thing. And on Facebook, I was liked or was friends with a lady who goes by the name of the Libertarian Homeschooler. And she was putting out great information about homeschooling. And so that was kind of like my safety. Is like, okay, this lady's super smart and she's putting out great information and she's got me to the point where I'm confident enough to do this myself. Now, what's strange is this is a guy who has a master's degree in education. And I'm licensed in the state of Texas to teach almost every single subject there is. And I'm afraid to actually educate my own child. Like, where's the disconnect there? Like, why wouldn't I be able to? Like, if I can educate 20 kids in a room for a day, why can't I educate my own child?
Wow,
that's
a powerful point. Like, if you as a licensed, if you do this for your job and you're intimidated about teaching your own kid, then I feel a lot better. So thanks for sharing that.
Exactly. I mean, so I had to, and it's not over. And I mean, that was in 2011 when we pulled our daughter from school. She was about 6 years old at that point. And when I pulled her then, I was experiencing a lot of fear, but it was probably easier at that point because a few friends of mine who are also tired of paying for these international schools in Chiang Mai said, hey, our kids loved you when you were a teacher, will you educate our kids too? And I was like, well, sure, let's talk. And so we just, we decided to open this little cooperative program together where we all chipped in enough money to pay for, an English teacher, which are easy to find in Thailand because there's a lot of people that come over to teach English. And so for about $1,000 a month, we can hire one of these people because that's what the Thai schools pay them to teach in the schools. And so, since all of us worked, we could get this English teacher in there and I could kind of in the background help run the curriculum and instruction side. That was the concept. But I had been reading Ken Robinson's works about passion and talent being really what we should base our education off of. And so at that point, it was exciting. And I wasn't scared because I had other people with me. And I mean, I was still afraid to do it, pull our child from school. But it wasn't as scary as when I left that situation and we moved. And all of a sudden, I was in a new place where I didn't have friends and I didn't know the community. And I was facing like, oh, my child's going to have to go to, a government school maybe. And I'm just sitting there like, that ain't going to happen. But I'm like, I can't be home. My wife can't be home. My daughter's too young to stay at home. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
And I really started to get scared. And even today, like just thinking my daughter's 12 right now, she's really interested in learning math. I don't know why, but she just wants to learn math. And then she does her other things, music and dance. I'm sitting here like, oh, I got to get her a teacher. She's got to learn the math. And, and all these worries about will this teacher be good enough? And if my daughter isn't learning with other children, is it going to, limit her ability to understand that? And still all of these same fears coming up in my mind, where I even start to question oh, maybe I should just, put her in school so she can get this proper schooling experience. But I resist, and largely because my daughter is in control. And so, whether I'm fearing this or not, I respect my daughter's wishes and her will to do what she wants to do, and help her to learn what she wants to learn.
And that statement there is what rubs so many parents the wrong way, because it feels unnatural, because that's not how they were raised. It's how they were raised that determines if that sentence you just said strokes their fur in the right direction or the wrong direction. That goes back to the point I was making, where our parenting determines our kids' worldview and how they fit in.
Absolutely.
And the situation that you described, where the community got together and they chipped in to make schooling possible, sounds exactly like how it's always been done 200 years and beyond ago. You know what I'm saying? Like, the community gets together, they build a schoolhouse, they chip in for the resources that the teacher needs to concentrate on the kids, and they do it. And the second thing that came to mind from your talking was this I guess I'll call it like an idea that I've had, a thing that I think is true, but maybe you can speak to it, is that I think, and a lot of this comes from pushback you get when you start talking to your friends and family about homeschooling your kid. Are they going to be socialized with other kids well enough? Are they going to learn to have a peer group of other, near-aged kids to learn from? My thought on that is that it is entirely overrated. Like, it's good for your kid to have friends to play with, but I want the bonding, I want their peer group to be adults in a lot of ways, because they're going to learn trades, they're going to learn how to behave and how to interact as an adult with adults, not from peers that are kids, from adults. I think it's overrated that we think we have to socialize them and sort of rub them together with everyone else's kids. In a lot of ways, that's dangerous, especially here in Texas, where everyone is spanked and forcefully parented. It's like you're basically taking your precious gem that you have worked so hard to protect from the violence of the world, and then just kind of ramming it together with everyone else's parenting styles vicariously through all these other children. Now, I'm not saying you isolate them, but I'm just saying it's overrated, I think. What are your thoughts on that?
But this is a huge topic in the homeschooling and unschooling world, and it's like somewhere between like something that really pisses people off and then something that makes people laugh. But it's funny because the first thing is the term socialization is just thrown around. I mean, what exactly are people talking about? Because I'm of the opinion that even if you're a hermit and you're living by yourself, you're socializing with yourself. I mean, your form of socialization is an isolated form of socialization. That really everything we do and everything we interact with, whether it be the media or living human beings, is what you might call socialization or influencing a person. And what happens in schools really is not socialization. I would call it forced association. Just like when we go to work, I mean, people could say, oh yeah, you got to go to work to be socialized. It's kind of the same thing as like, we don't think of work as the place we go for social stuff. Yes, there's a social part of the work environment and interacting, and maybe we even make friends with people we work with. Maybe we can't stand people we work with. The same is true in a classroom, and maybe even more so because children usually don't have the same level of manners or tact when it comes to interacting, and they'll be a lot more brutal and direct. And so you get these what people call bullying, or even all-out violent and people being hit and brutalized in schools. And then you have to sit in a chair. You're supposed to basically do everything a child is programmed not to do, like sit still and listen to really boring stuff that they're not interested in, and behave while you're being subjected to this horrible conditions. And that's not every child, but I'd say most children aren't very enthusiastic about way more than 50% of what goes on in their school day. They might be excited when PE comes along and they can go out and play sports, or maybe it's art, or maybe they love math. But at some point during the day, they're sitting in a classroom like just hating it. So if we're going to call that socialization, okay, then fine. To me, that's just it's. I don't know. I mean, I guess again, I go back to what it really is. Socialization. How do you deconstruct that term? And I don't really know myself the best way to deconstruct it, other than to say that pretty much everything you're interacting with, whether it's media or live humans, is going to affect your worldview and who you are. And so, yes, I don't want my child going to a school because I don't want my child picking up their worldview or their behavior patterns and thinking patterns and emotional and psychological being through these strangers. And the common "it takes a village" phrase is thrown around a lot. And then I also hear homeschoolers and unschoolers saying, I've seen that village, and thanks, I'll do it myself.
Yes, exactly.
That's a good one to go on right there. You mentioned, in Texas, you have kind of a heavy-handed sort of a community around you, and I don't want my child being smacked or being around parents who are smacking their kids. Come on.
Or kids of parents that smack. Like the behavior patterns that you instill in your kid when you spank them rub off. They affect your kid's behavior, which affects their peers. So I don't want them in my kid's peer group. That's dangerous. That undoes all the hard work I'm doing here in my house to make it a peaceful place.
Exactly.
So, I'm just trying to go down my list of fears. So we've kind of talked about, are we capable? Time is a big fear that a lot of parents have. Am I going to have enough time? How much time is this going to take? Because normally I could be going to work while I ship my kid off to public school. What are the time involvements when we get into this practically?
Mm-hmm. Well, time, that's an interesting one. To kind of spin it in another way is the time in school, and I've read a lot of research, and the number 1 hour comes up a lot when you think about how much actual learning or quality education time happens per day in a school. And 1 hour per day is a common number that's thrown around. Now you think about, okay, well, the kid goes to school for about 6 hours a day. They're stuck in those buildings. So if you get 1 hour for every 6 of quality learning, what's happening those other 5 hours?
You're interacting with a peer group of random people that are going to teach your kid random lessons that may or may not be a good thing.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And even, on extreme, there's things that happen in those 5 hours that are either wasting time or is extremely detrimental to the emotional and psychological state and their learning in general. So when you think about time, if you can have a situation at home where you can let your child learn at home, either mom or dad is home, or you do a little cooperative like I was talking about, and hopefully somebody in this day and age can still afford to have one parent available at home. I mean, that is a crushing monopoly, and I won't talk about that now, that the government has on schooling. How do you even provide that time? Well, when kids come home from school, there's a lot of time after school before they go to bed. There's weekends, Saturday and Sunday, and then there's the most joyful time of year for, I think, every child is summertime. And so what do you do as parents? Send them to camps and things. There's a lot of time outside of school that can be used to really support your child in following their interests. And some parents do that instinctually, but a lot of parents want to play the role of the controller, and so they'll force their kid to go to a camp rather than let their child choose a camp. Or they'll force their kid to learn, say, trumpet rather than electric guitar. And so you see a lot of parents overriding, their children's, natural inclination to learn. So yeah, time is a fear, but just fall back on 1 hour per day as if you're going to compete with a school as a parent. If you can give your child 1 hour a day, 5 days a week to sit down and help them with some of the things they're going to need help with, for example, language and mathematics, or kind of the old school reading, writing, and arithmetic. Your kids will need some help. We all needed some help along the way. If you can afford that little bit of time, then you can outcompete school because the 1 hour a day you give your child will be far better quality than what a teacher will give 20, 30, 40 kids in a classroom the same information.
That's true, but and I want to clarify for the viewers, like what we're not saying. So we're getting an echo.
Okay.
So what we're not saying is that your kids are only learning for 1 hour a day. Like we're saying that the support needed from a parent might be an hour a day. So like the difference being, if they're in school, they're learning what they're being forced to learn. They're not interested in it. They're only doing it because they have to get good grades to keep from getting grounded or punished or suspended or whatever. But when it's things your kids are interested in, we learn only that which we want to learn. So when your kids are interested in learning, you give them a little push and they just take off like rockets. And this is my life and this is my kids' life and this is evidenced everywhere with everyone I know. If they're interested in learning, it doesn't take much. Like my mom bought me a computer. I remember one time I was 15 years old. All I wanted it was a birthday and Christmas together because it was so expensive and we were not well off. I wanted a programming language, and back then you buy the software. It was Borland C++. It was like $1,200 in 1990s dollars. When I'm 15, what 15-year-old asks for his Christmas and birthday present to be a coding language? That's way, way expensive. But she did. She got it. She spent the money. That was my gift, and I loved it. And that little push, and I took off. And so we're not saying that an hour a day is all that they're going to spend learning, because of course that's not how it works.
No, that's a fact. The hour a day was just, like when people think they send their kids to school and they're in there for 6 hours, they're getting all this great stuff. When in reality, when you dig down into the research, you're lucky if you get an hour a day of actual instruction happening. And so that I think helps break through some of the fear that parents might have regarding time and things like that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I love you going back to your own stories. And when
Sorry,
I talk
keep talking about it so much.
No, they're great anecdotes because getting parents to open up to unschooling is why I wrote this book. It's very difficult because people are so conditioned and so believing in this system being an essential thing for their child, that one of the tactics I try and use when I talk to people is I ask them, well, what do you do with your free time? If you're not digging your feet into some sand on a beach somewhere, like what do you actually do? Like, you got to clean the house and go shopping or whatever, but do you have hobbies? Are there things that you do? And almost everybody I know does have things that they love to do just based in passion, whether it's gardening or whether it's going out with friends for food, whatever that thing is. And usually people really are experts in those things, probably, or quite often, greater level of expertise in their hobbies than their actual careers. And I think that also helps to illustrate why passion-based learning is such a great way to go, because it's so effective. You got your little coding program thing as a present, and that has a huge effect, I'm assuming, on who you are as an adult and the skills and knowledge you have and what you're able to do to create income for yourself.
I mean, it's everything. It's been my entire career, and it's still. And you know what? The difference between if I had gone to finish school and gone to college, and I didn't even go to college. I self-taught myself everything I know to do what I do in IT, and that is my life. And I'm not one of those people that's just like, oh, I hate my job. I love my job. I love everything about it. I'm passionate about it. It's everything. It's my world. And this is exactly where I want to be, and I'm doing exactly what I should and want to be doing. And that's because I taught myself based on my own passion, which was your point you just made.
Exactly.
We have a couple questions. Kaysen, do you want to give those to us?
Sure. So the first question is, would you say that sending children off to state schools, such as they are, is child abuse? That's our first question to you, Mark.
Absolutely. I think I even mentioned a little before that it is child abuse. And speaking in such strong terms, is important. Although I do it in the book, I don't do it as much, just in interacting with people, because it sets them off into a defensive stance immediately.
Yeah.
But it really is abuse. And it's not that every child hates going to school and has a bad time, but forcing children against their free will or coercing children to learn something or do something, is it can be abusive. I mean, sure, you have to send your kids to bed, or maybe you don't. I actually don't. I let my child sleep when they want. I guess there's a lot of room for debate in there, but to skip the debate side, I am of the opinion that government schooling is definitely a form of abuse. You are allowing people who don't have the best interests of your child to manipulate and play with their mind and their heart. To me, that's a disturbing thing, that people are so willing and beyond willing to even thinking that this is an essential to make their child a happy, healthy person, is almost borderline crazy. And that shows the level of indoctrination that people have been subjected to for so long, that everybody alive today has either lived in a society created through a schooling system, or grew up in that actual system themselves. And so people are thoroughly indoctrinated into believing school is what makes society great. The average American person I talk to thinks school is one of the key pillars of what makes America great. And I am of the opinion that it is it unethical, it's immoral, and it should be abolished. The Department of Education should be abolished. Government education should be abolished, because it is a subtle form of chattel slavery. And I don't say that lightly. And for the viewers who are wincing or bristling at my comments, I'm not saying this to get people's backs up. I would just challenge you to go and read, maybe Ron Paul's book, Ending the Fed, and just try and get an understanding of how the Federal Reserve System works and the income tax system works. Because when you understand that really is a form of slavery, and then you send your children into a school system and you actually analyze that and look at what are they teaching my child, you can see there is an agenda. There is a social engineering agenda at hand, and they don't want your children to understand the Federal Reserve or the income tax. They don't want them to know they're slaves, and they fill them with a lot of based on truth or complete lies or omissions, a history of the world and the United States. And they keep information that would be very valid for them to be exposed to, of what America really is, or what liberty really is, or what were the ideas of the founders of our country, or what were we fighting for in the Revolutionary War. But instead, they're brainwashed into what I'll just throw out the term cultural Marxism. Because working in the school systems, I know that this is what's going on. I can see it from the curriculum instruction side. And I hate to talk badly of my colleagues, but I have a hard time with this, like, oh, let's be positive and pretend it's not horrible, because a lot of educators get down on me and, but these are good people and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, yeah, they're good people, but they're out there doing horrible things. And, I'm just not okay with that. And these educators, most of them, are extreme left-wing Marxists, and they don't even know it. Some of them don't even know who Karl Marx is.
The success of Marxism is the success of Marxism is that it was successfully dumbed down to where people can be it without knowing they are it, which I really think when we get there with ANCAP, with anarchy, with anarcho-capitalism, it is the natural state of being. We just have to sort of let people realize it's there. But what you were saying really makes me think of like a Prince Rupert's drop. Have you ever seen those before? It's where you drop molten glass into cold water, and it forms this teardrop shape of hardened glass that solidifies from the outside in. And the thick end you can hit with a hammer, you can drive cars over it. It is one of the hardest substances. But if you just take the tail end of that teardrop and you can just snap it off, the entire thing explodes. And this idea of non-coercive parenting is just like breaking that. It's like a simple thing. Oh yeah, we shouldn't coerce our kids. Click, boom, and then the entire paradigm it just looks totally different. It explodes in 1,000 different directions. No, I don't force my kids to go to sleep. What right do I have to tell a person when they wake and sleep? And guess what? They're just fine. They're perfectly healthy. They're happier. We don't have a lot of conflict every night trying to make them go to bed at a certain time. They go to sleep. My 2-year-old, puts herself to sleep when she's tired. She says, "Dad, I'm tired. I'm going to go take a nap." It's normal. It's things that we've been raised to coerce just aren't necessary. The coercion isn't necessary. So
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
We have another question.
That we do. Okay, so last question coming over to you is, will unschooled children have problems later in life, like if they want to go to a trade school but they have no records? How do you handle these pragmatic questions?
I get this question a lot. I offer free consultation wherever I'm living, at the time when I'm living there, and even to people around the world. And that question is one of the most common questions. And it's a very valid question because we want to make sure our children can go on and do the things they want to do. And hey, what if my child wants to go to college? How do I apply to a college if they don't have a high school degree or some kind of transcripts? And there's a lot of ways you can go about this. The good news is that universities are getting savvy about homeschoolers and unschoolers.
And becoming,
they know
becoming
now.
less necessary.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, college with the internet, it's like, give me an empty room in the internet, and I've got kindergarten through PhD education library at hand.
Exactly.
And so, college. I certainly think in our lifetime, the schooling paradigm that we know will crumble, and the university system is going to take a big hit here too. And what that will morph into, who knows? But if you did want to send if your child does decide they want to go to college, how are you going to get them in there if they don't have a high school degree? Well, the universities are very savvy right now, and they seek, the best universities seek homeschoolers, as much as, or maybe even to more a degree as schoolers, because they're better educated. I mentioned earlier, they beat them on every level, including test scores and stuff.
Of course they do, because they were motivated to learn what they learned. They wanted to learn.
Yeah, exactly. And they know because they've been taking in homeschoolers, and they'll graduate, from college with far better, academics and et cetera, et cetera. So the universities are hip to this. So that's helpful to the homeschoolers and unschoolers, because now they're not these strange, people who just want to indoctrinate their kids to be Christians, which is what the old view of homeschooling was 10, 20 years ago. They're actually, it's gone mainstream enough where universities are seeking these people. So they're more open to a less traditional show of what you've done with your childhood. Yeah. But a couple of things you can do that are very practical. One is you can make transcripts for your child. Just go on internet and look what a school transcript looks like and copy it. And just write down what your kid's interested in year by year and what they're doing.
Yeah, there you go.
Another one is you can get a GED, is it GRE? GRE. And that's the high school equivalency, which is a high school degree. You can start having your child. Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
I've come a long way on GED.
There you go. Yeah. Exactly. And I'm this idiot who's got all this college debt racked up and for these degrees, which I find like almost useless now. So there it is.
I'd have to say that I think less of Patrick now that I know that he doesn't have a proper diploma. You're not even human to me anymore.
Didn't even finish high school. And I used to be ashamed and I used to be worried about putting that out there, but I didn't even finish high school, but I am where I am through the capacity of my own brain and my own willpower and my own drive and energy to get where I want to get and learn what I want to learn, which is this topic is my life. That's why I love it so much. So,
and that's go ahead.
No, I was just going to wrap it up. Did you have anything else you wanted to kind of close out with for today? I mean, I would absolutely want to have you back because I wanted to get into some of the more specifics of the mechanics of the things you're teaching in your book. But for today, did you have any kind of final thoughts?
No, I mean, just wrapping it up, I wanted to just finish up with the what can parents do?
Oh, yeah.
you can have your child start taking college classes online or even at a community college. And so when you go to apply to a college, you've already got a transcript from a college under your belt. And, one last bit on that is if you are aware of Peter Gray, or if you're not aware of Peter Gray, he has a several piece series out, which is free. You can find him on Facebook or on the internet, which he has been tracking unschoolers, people who have unschooled for their whole life or most of their life and then gone into adulthood. And he's tracked them. And what he shows is that the vast majority outperform, or let's just say they get success. And what is success? And I'll just say success is being a happy person who can get what they want and need in life and is a peaceful, person coexisting in society, blah, 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 right? Is that path is attainable through unschooling, and actually unschooling provides that naturally. When you look at the research he's got on about 70 or so individuals, all of them, except I think one, would unschool their own children and have grown up into careers that maybe aren't lucrative, or maybe they are, but they're the careers that make them happy. And so these people have happy lives and they are productive members of society and taking care of their families. So don't fear the college thing. And by the time your kids go to school, they probably won't even have to submit these stupid SAT scores or anything, because that kind of bubble test stuff is kind of going out the window as well. So no fear there.
All right. Thank you, Mark Beaumont, for coming on. Please tell me that you'll let us have you back on maybe after your book is released to finish talking about the specifics of the personal learner profiles that you discussed in your book. We didn't get into them at all today, but I hope you'll come back on.
Please, I can't wait to come back on. And thanks so much, Patrick and Kason, for having me on. Disenthrall. I love watching your show. It was connected to Victor, who put out your link, which got me onto your show. And thanks a lot. And I look forward to coming back on. It was a great experience.
Thank you, Mark. Hang out on the line with us for the after show, which is a new thing that we're about to start doing. I just want to let everyone know we have refreshed our Patreon. We kind of blank slated it. We have all new rewards. We have all new everything. If you go there right now, you could be our very first Patreon. We're going to start after all of our live streams. We tend to talk with our guests for sometimes an hour after the show, having sometimes really good conversations. And we wanted to find a way to share those, and we thought it would be a perfect reward for people that wanted to help support the show and help make this possible and help us, pay for new equipment and things like that. So please check out our Patreon page. Link will be in the description. You can hop on there and be included in what we're calling after streams, and we'll find a way at a certain level to where we'll actually, maybe use a Discord channel so you can actually talk, have voice chat with us and our guests during the after show. So please check that out. Let us know if you have any questions. On this unschooling topic and on the book, we forgot to ask. Mark, can you tell us where people can go to find more information on your book that will be out?
Yeah, actually, you could just find me on Facebook for right now. I had a website up years ago, but I didn't really like the direction it was going, so I scrapped it. So right now, I'm not the easiest guy to find. And over the coming weeks, my book will be available on Amazon and all of the ebook. It's actually an ebook. I might print at some point, but it'll be an ebook. So, I'll post it on my Facebook page. And if you're interested in unschooling, just go look on Amazon, and over the coming weeks, it should pop up there for you.
Okay, we'll do a follow-up post on our Facebook page with the information that you give us for people to look you up and get connected with you for this book. And we'll also, we'll talk to you again once the book is out and give people exact information for where they can find it. So thanks for everyone that watched. Thanks to Victor for asking the questions. We will see you guys later.